Hi there, this is Solitary Ronan from Solitary Ronan Films, and welcome to our random review. Today's random review comes all the way back from 1961, and it's The Children's Hour, starring Audrey Hepburn, Shirley McClaine, James Garner, Miriam Hopkins, yes, that Miriam Hopkins, who we all love in those screwball comedies of the 30s and 40s. Obviously 1961, so she's older than she was in the 30s and 40s. It also stars Veronica Cartwright when she was 12, which is quite interesting because she still has those little tics of biting her lip and crying that she's done so often in films. But it is amazing to see her as a 12-year-old, and strangely enough, she looks just like Veronica Cartwright, but younger. And it also stars a little girl called Karen Balkin as Mary, who is one of the most horrible characters in cinema history. And I don't think that's hyperbolic in any way, shape or form. This is a film directed by William Wyler, who also made another interesting film in the 60s, 1965's The Collector, with Terence Stamp. This is based on a play by Lillian Hellman, a play that is still going or still gets revived every now and again. There's actually been a recent version of it with Keira Knightley, Elizabeth Moss, Carol Kane and Ellen Bloody Burstyn. I mean, so if anybody's actually seen that, let me know in the comments. This is a Region A Kino Lorber. I don't think this has got a Region B Blu-ray, but it has Indicator written all over it. A certain Indicator type film. So who knows, there might be a Region B version at some point. I found the film to be absolutely fantastic. Even though the ending did upset me a little bit, but I will do a separate spoiler version for the ending, because I feel like I do have to talk about the ending. This was nominated for 5 Oscars in 1961. Didn't win any, not that that matters. But the basic story is Shirley MacLaine and Audrey Hepburn run a small school for girls, and Karen Balkin's character is Mary, and Veronica Cartwright are 2 of the pupils there. And Audrey Hepburn's character has been engaged to James Garner, who's a doctor, for a couple of years, but she doesn't want to leave Shirley MacLaine with the school because they're just kind of breaking even and they're just trying to establish themselves. Enter Mary, this child. If you want to hear some hilarious reviews, go to Letterboxd, because there's quite a lot of abuse directed at Mary's character. Now, Karen Balkin only made 2 films in her entire career, both set, strangely enough, in girl schools. And when I say, as I did earlier, that she is one of the worst characters as far as just being utterly reprehensible, she's a badly behaved girl, but she kicks off the whole plot by taking perhaps innocent things and starting a rumour that Shirley MacLaine and Audrey Hepburn are actually lovers. This is 1961, of course. And once the ball starts rolling, all the parents take their kids out of the school, and the school is obviously in trouble. James Garner ends up losing his job for associating with those kinds of people. it's a small town, a kind of rich small town, and the kind of matriarch of this town is the one that kind of kicks on the rumour, and tells all the parents to get their children out of that environment. Because as we know, that kind of thing makes children go crazy. But the reason for watching this film is the performances, and to some extent Wyler's direction. I mean, at one point later in the film, he uses those quick cuts that really give you a sense of motion as Hepburn's character is running in a certain direction. McClaine is absolutely blistering in the film. This is the best I've ever seen Audrey Hepburn, to be honest. I've never really been a huge Audrey Hepburn fan. I much prefer Katharine Hepburn in the Hepburn versus Hepburn stakes. I'm not exactly sure what distance they run in that race, but Audrey Hepburn is phenomenal in this. James Garner, who you could slightly make the argument he's a little miscast, but still good, does wonderful work. And of course Miriam Hopkins, I mean, what can you say about Miriam Hopkins? She's fantastic as Shirley McClaine's aunt, who used to be in the theatre and is teaching the girls something or other, and she doesn't help the situation when it's about overheard conversations and things being taken out of context, and Mary, that horrible child who doesn't like McClaine and Hepburn because they're constantly punishing her, but they're constantly punishing her because she's a terrible person, and she uses this, and she doesn't really understand what these words mean. You know, the words unnatural, or the word unnatural, comes up quite a lot, and she doesn't really understand what that means. But then she blackmails Veronica Cartwright's character, so there's another person to corroborate this story or this rumour. And Veronica Cartwright's character is interesting because she seems to have a lot of jewellery that doesn't belong to her, so she's a little kleptomaniac. But again, it's just wonderful seeing Veronica Cartwright as a 12-year-old, because as I say, the mannerisms are still there that she would have when she's actually grown up. So Mary, to say that she's a bad apple is probably one of the greatest understatements in history. She's absolutely awful. If you had Grabo-vision, you might be tempted to do her some bodily harm when you're watching this film, because you literally will be slapping your forehead with your palm quite a lot. She's just awful. But again, to me, you could argue that's maybe a weakness, because she is just so outwardly horrible, whereas if it was one of the more well-behaved girls that started the rumour, you know, not out of spite, just of seeing things and hearing things. But again, we have to have antagonists, and Mary is one of the most amazing antagonists. And of course her, I don't know if it's her aunt, I think it might be her grandmother, is the kind of matriarch who's got all the money and tells all the other parents how to, or what to do, or how to live their lives. So Mary has that angle. So she's basically taking the huff because she's treated, or she thinks she's being treated badly. That sounds familiar for quite a lot of people in this world. So she takes out on these two poor women. It's just absolutely wonderful, and as I said, brilliantly shot. Once you get into the characters, personally I was absolutely hooked, and it's absolutely riveting. It's 107 minutes long. Apparently there was a courtroom scene, because the two women do launch a libel suit, and then it kind of goes from a scene and then they're back at the house and they've lost the libel suit and it's all over the newspapers, but there's no real joining scene to that. It's pretty abrupt from, we'll see you in court, to, oh well, we've been in court and we lost. But there are like stills on the internet of the courtroom scene, but it's just not in the film. I mean, 107 minutes, it flies by. It could have been longer, because you do want to spend more time with some of the characters, not Bloody Mary, of course. It's quite an extraordinary performance. And you root for McClaine and Hepburn, not just because it's McClaine and Hepburn, and not because of any, social justice warrior attitude. It's just because they're really good characters and you root for these people. Again, it's not just about, the anti-homosexual angle. It's more just about, the class thing of the rich, and then you get these two women actually struggling to put a school together and actually make a living from it, and that's taken away from them as well. It's just such a good film, great performances. Again, you could argue that Mary is a little bit too horrible, and it might have been more interesting, like I say, if it was, quote, a well-behaved girl that started these rumours. But again, it is a play, it is a film, and it's obviously more dramatic to have that. So I'm going to go into spoilers, because I kind of have to talk about the ending. But if you haven't seen it, please go and see it, and then you can come back and let me know what you think. But it's another wonderful Kino Lorber release. Unfortunately, there's absolutely no extras apart from a trailer, as you kind of get with Kino Lorber. Sometimes they're loaded with extras, other times there's literally nothing or just a trailer. But really good film. Again, modern audiences might go, oh, that kind of thing doesn't happen anymore. We're all much more tolerant of people who have different sexuality or look different. And it's like, well, that's not really true. I mean, gay people still get murdered in certain countries. If you look at, for example, the South American murder rate of trans people, and the successful actual prosecution of the people who did it, it's virtually nil. And obviously there's still countries where gay people are put in prison or murdered. I mean, there's countries in the world that if you're an atheist, you get put into psychiatric hospitals. So we're not quite there yet. People still have problems with people's sexuality, and what they do behind closed doors, which is always a wonderful phrase, or what they do in their front garden. So it's a wonderful film, still a relevant film, but I am going to now talk about the ending. So thanks very much for watching, and I'm going to talk about the ending now. Now I kind of have a history, and I've probably said it on the channel, that I quite like bleak endings. And this ending is fairly bleak, but also in the context of 60s Hollywood and the establishment. Is it actually bleak? Or is it still essential to keep the kind of balance of the norm? Because obviously lots of people, certainly at that time, viewed homosexuality as abnormal and unnatural. So, James Garner's lost his job. Hepburn and McClaine have lost the school, so Garner wants them to move out to the country, the three of them in a farmhouse. At one point he actually asks Hepburn, is this true? Which Hepburn says no. But as Hepburn says, that doubt is still going to be, as I drop the microphone, that doubt is still going to be in James Garner's mind. So she pretty much ends it with James Garner. And then Shirley McClaine kind of confesses that she has had those feelings for Hepburn ever since she's known her, and they went to college, which I'm kicking myself because I didn't actually mention that in the non-spoiler section. So they've known each other for years, they've been friends, they've started this school. But McClaine gets this off her chest, and obviously Hepburn is a little shaken with that because they just viewed each other as friends. It turns out that Veronica Cartwright's character finally cracks to the fact she's been blackmailed by Mary, and the rich woman comes to apologise in a great scene where they're pretty much saying, we don't want anything from you. It's too late for that, strangely enough. And then Hepburn goes for a walk. Miriam Hopkins is back at this point after being told to leave after the trouble she caused, and she didn't turn up to court to support them. And then, as I said, Wyler really uses those kind of fast cuts, very similar to Kurosawa's cuts between the Seven Samurais, they're running, and other films. So you get a really great sense of motion as Hepburn's running back into the house, because Miriam Hopkins can't get in to Shirley MacLaine's room, and Hepburn knocks the door down and Shirley MacLaine has hanged herself, which was actually quite upsetting because I wanted, even if Hepburn didn't want it, I wanted the two of them to ride off into the sunset. So in some ways, well, it was upsetting to me just because I wanted the two of them to be together because they're just people you root for. But then from the Hollywood, the kind of establishment perspective, it's that way where MacLaine has to die, because again she's so guilty about being gay or whatever, or realising that she's gay, so she's got to hang herself, as lots of people have over the years, just through the guilt and the way society looks at homosexuality. So again, from a Hollywood standpoint, it's like, the order has been restored almost. Hepburn walks away. We don't know what will happen to her. Whether did she have feelings underneath, or will she reunite with James Garner? There's a nice scene at the funeral, whereas some of the townspeople and James Garner stand there, and Audrey Hepburn just walks right past them. Obviously not as wonderful as the end of The Third Man, because that's seminal walking past, one of the great walking past scenes of all time. So again, for me, the ending was upsetting because I didn't want Shirley MacLaine to hang herself. But in some way, it's that kind of element of Hollywood putting things back in order. It's that way that some of the film noirs are so bleak and so cynical, but then at the end they have this happy, not necessarily happy ending, but the ending does kind of change to the rest of the tone of the film. And yes, it is more realistic, I guess, because sadly over the years lots of people have killed themselves in that situation. So you could say it's realistic, but then from a establishment sense, you could say, well, that had to happen to restore, as I say, order. Yes, I kind of go back and forward on the ending and what that ending actually represents, but it's still a wonderful film and well worth seeing, I think, for the performances. Even if you probably will be screaming at the screen when innocent little Mary turns up. So thanks very much for watching this fairly rambling review of The Children's Hour. So well worth checking out. Apart from anything else, it's a little bit of Hollywood history with fairly seminal star power. So please let me know in the comments if you've seen Children's Hour and what you think of it. And hopefully you'll join me again for more random reviews. This is Soldier Ronan from Soldier Ronan Films, saying farewell.